tonight's event is really about celebrating, exposing, and inquiring around all of the competition entries for the 210 George Street project. Also for this evening, we have our event sponsors, Poly Australia, who obviously are the developers for the 210 George Street project. So thank you very much to Poly as well for helping provide some of the catering that we have here tonight, and for agreeing to put on an event like this. Sometimes you do find it a bit difficult to kind of convince developers that we should be sharing these schemes and these ideas and presenting in this kind of form. So thank you very much to Poly. I'd like to welcome Jay Cotter, Poly's Australian Sales and Marketing Director, up to the stage just to say a few brief words about Poly. Jay?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us here this evening. It's a great honour to actually be able to present to you, or have you, as the industry, present to yourselves as to the competition that was conducted for 210 George Street. My name's Jay Carter. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director for Poly. And I just want to use this opportunity to promote and sprout, I'll make it very, very brief, who we are, because a lot of you may not have an understanding of who we are and what we actually do. We're predominantly a residential developer, and this is our first commercial building that we're conducting at 210 George Street. Completed in Sydney, we've got a project at Epping and a project at Lindfield. Epping is complete, and Lindfield is currently under construction at the moment. We've also got several projects down in Melbourne, one of which is the very exciting, the 1000 La Trobe Street, which is another commercial building that'll be built. It's in the planning processes, and Summit at Doncaster, and again one of our completed projects at Claremont Manor in South Yarra in Melbourne. But globally, we have a lot of experience in commercial real estate. As I said, we're a Chinese-based developer, and we now like to think of ourselves as an international developer as we've expanded beyond the shores of Australia and beyond the shores of China. We've moved into London and also the US as well. So we are on an expanding project and an expanding platform with projects right across the globe. But these are just a few of the more interesting ones that I've wanted to present to give you an idea of some of the things that we actually do, and I will let those projects speak for themselves. We are excited, and we were very, very excited, and I remember the day that the presentations arrived in their boxes and in their kits back in the office. I didn't have the privilege of being on the selection panel for these projects for 210 George Street, but it was it was almost like a parent seeing the ultrasound of their new unborn child, for the first time. Each ultrasound, each presentation was unique in its own aspects and had its own charm. And to be honest, we fell in love. A lot of us within the office absolutely fell in love with a lot of what was presented. There was gold glittering throughout the process, and some of the ideas were very innovative. And so I thank all of the participants genuinely for their contribution for what they did for this process. We feel the process was a tremendous value add to the building and to the design, and obviously to the City of Sydney as well. So we're very delighted to have been part of this entire process. The process, as I said, was a good one, and I'd like to thank the Sydney City Council for that. And I'd also like to obviously mention Hassel, PTW and SOM, Grimshaw, Fitzpatrick and Partners, BVN and DBJ as well, for all their hard work in putting these through. So that's enough from me, but ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here and for you to explore our babies a little bit more. And we really appreciate all the work that the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat have done in putting this event on. So thank you very much.
So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first presentation from the evening will be by BVN, presented by Philip Roden and Fab Fatalipuri, if I got that anywhere close to correct. Thanks, Fab. So Phil and Fab have both worked at BVN for just over 2 years. They've been involved in numerous City of Sydney design excellence competitions at BVN and worked on the 210 George Street competition from the onset of the project. Would you please welcome Philip and Fab?
So I'd just like to thank you for having us. We think it's a great event to be a part of, and yeah, because we're sticking to time, we'll jump right in. Basically when we first sat down as a design studio, we basically sat there and strategized what we wanted to do. Within City of Sydney design competitions, we always kind of sit in a forum and discuss how we're going to approach the project. What we decided was we wanted to focus on workplace and urban as equal importance. So something which contributed obviously to the city, but something which offered a commercial model for an ever-changing market of commercial clients. Within this presentation, I'll primarily be talking about workplace, and then Fab will move on to the urban aspects. So workplace, what we mean by targeted workplace, we saw the building as being part of a precinct, an ever-changing part of the city with a multitude of commercial basically opportunities for clients to tap into. The way we saw this building was fitting into a community, but also providing a unique identity to the current tenants, but also to the future needs of this ever-changing, ever-adapting workplace and commercial structure we find ourselves in today. What that meant is that health and well-being we placed at the central core of our ideas. With that, we decided to move the core of the building from the reference scheme. What that allowed is we put people near light, so actually making people use the edge of the building, allowing for light views out to the city, and really allowing the majority of your day to be spent near a window, which is a very simple move. What that also meant was within the central part of the floor plate, you were able to basically provide something that interconnected floors that provided a space so that it can engage with different levels and different meeting spaces. And this basically allowed us to say the building could be used by one tenant and have interdependency, or it can actually be used by a multitude of tenants and allow for individual people to use shared spaces, but then also to all come together as one organization into them spaces as well. With that, we wanted to provide all of the tenants with unique opportunities to use external zones. So we decided that within the carving of the form and the landscape elements, we'd actually provide a variety of environments so that if you were on a specific floor plate, you can use an external space adjacent to your space, but you can also go to spaces actually going up the tower. So what that meant is that rather than providing cut and paste floor slabs, we said, okay, to the podium, we've got winter gardens, which are predominantly owned by the people within them spaces. Then you've got levels 9, 10, and 11, which are external larger spaces, which allow the internal community to use and adopt, but also allow basically a breakdown of scale to offer to the city. With that, we also provided a rooftop garden, and the whole idea behind all of these clusters of spaces was that you were allowing unique experiences, so you'd hope that the building would be used in a way where you can actually travel up the building and go to a destination. And as you can see there, it creates a variety of community neighborhoods and destination planning. This kind of just shows a sectional perspective, which we won't really talk over. And then what I also led into was flexibility, which was a core part of our proposal. This led into a structural system of timber-framed construction and basically movable parts of the frame. We kind of felt that the future commercial market is evolving and is not in place yet. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, so something that actually looks easy to adapt and produce less waste, so you're able to easily remove parts of floor plates to basically adapt your space over time and allow for future tenant needs. What it also meant, it was a very practical consideration. So we were talking with the engineers early on. We had 2 rail lines under the site, and we said, okay, what about how can we get the building as light as we possibly can to hopefully, when we get into more detailed research, actually keep that lightness over the tunnels and make it easier to construct. So we had concrete up until the 2nd level, and then a timber frame structure up to the top, which I think was actually one of the downfalls of the scheme. So it was we made it early on a decision to say we're going to do that, we're going to go for it. But then, yeah, in retrospect, maybe not the right idea. And then this is kind of one of them spaces which shows a glue-lime structure and a very definite structural solution. And then Fab, do you want to talk on?
Right, next. Okay. So traditionally, towers have been working as walls and voids of spaces in urban fabric, disconnected from the urban activity. So what we decided to do was to go in an unconventional way, maybe, and try to humanize the scale and continue the flow, urban flow on our proposal. To do that, we started breaking down the scale by introducing the pockets of green spaces and while keeping the existing street datums, both on Grosvenor side, street and on the George Street side, and introduced an inflection in the geometry of the tower as a waist that opens up the street to the solar axis and maximize the daylight factor, the skylight, sky view factor on the street. And then, of course, responding to the legislative rules and like the solar axis plane and height control. And finally, smoothing it up, with curved edges to bring back a bit of familiar Sydney feeling that you get when you're walking around Circular Quay. And this is the final geometry with its carved out bits of green spaces. So here's the final proposal that we did that provides, in our view, provides a boutique workplace that is connected, it's not disconnected from the urban activities on the street, and it connects the workplaces with the urban street activity with these interstitial interactional zones that we introduced as green pockets. Besides the geometry itself, the facade also responds and connects to the urban activity with these with the green pockets, and also to respond to the environmental factors, it opens up. It opens up in the middle and closes down on the edges to maximize the daylight factor on the workplace, and also with limited variations of depth for the fins, we respond to the direction of the solar. Besides that, we thought it's a good idea to keep the authentic Sydney material as the sandstone on the podium and GRC on the top. And also, as I mentioned before, the inflection in the tower opens up the view to the sky and also solar access on the ground level. And you can see the green spaces that is breaking down the scale. There's a normal elevation. So when you get to the lobby, you don't face a conventional lift lobby with a bunch of lifts in front of you, but you will start to interact with 3 levels of different activities, including a retail on the ground, commercial entries on the level 1, and informal co-working spaces on level 2. And you can see a typical view from the level 2 and interaction with the public activity on the ground. That was our proposal, short and quick. I hope you guys liked it.
Next, I'd like to welcome Liz Westgarth. Liz is a principal and practice lead for architecture at Hassel in the Sydney studio. She has a broad range of experience in commercial, residential, cultural and arts, education, and large city-shaping master plan projects in Australia and abroad. in both design and construction stages. Liz has a passion for design excellence and strives to achieve high-quality outcomes through mutual private and public benefit. She is currently a chapter councillor for the New South Wales Chapter Institute of Architects, representing members and advocating for the profession. Liz is also passionate about promoting women in the profession and is an active mentor and role model to the next generation of emerging leaders. Would you please welcome Liz Westgarth?
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. I'm really pleased to be here tonight to present our proposal for 210 George Street. It's a really exciting time in commercial, workplace and architecture. Technology is really giving rise to greater flexibility, and today the workplace is no longer somewhere where you have to be, but somewhere where you would want to be. So our response contextually positioned this building as the next generation workplace. Somewhere that's transparent and connected, authentic and comfortable, an extension of the city, and offers true flexibility and adaptability. We wanted it to be a building with a human touch, a bespoke, personalised atmosphere that really embodied the entrepreneurial spirit of its owners and occupants. It makes a confident and self-assured statement by housing a really flexible environment which is warm and comfortable. We really wanted it to feel like it was operating as a fine hotel, and our proposal really sought to be an individualist in what we saw as a conforming office market, really tapping into a deep pool of tenants whose needs we felt are currently quite poorly met. It's elegant, sophisticated, and it delivers significant commercial and public benefit. So I'm going to take you through 3 key spatial moves that really underpin our proposal and really unlock the environmental, commercial and design potential for the 210 George Street site. And these 3 key moves are locating the core to the north, shifting floor space high within the envelope, and setting the building back to the east and the south. So, for those of you who are not familiar, the reference scheme placed the core on the east, and at Hassel we really like to explore the possibilities through our design process. And fundamental to a successful office building is a well-placed core and its impact on the ground plane. So through careful consideration, we moved the core to the north, as we saw that it had some significant benefits. The first is increased natural daylight. So by moving the core to the north, we were able to free up 80% of the facade with glazing. That meant that 100% of the workplace was within 12 metres of the facade, creating excellent natural daylight and a high quality space. Moving the core to the north also meant that we were able to release expansive views from the main floor plate itself. So with 200 George Street and Lenley Circular Quay Towers in close proximity to the north, there was limited access to views. So from the floor plate itself, we were able to really capture the views to the west towards the Western Harbour and Barangaroo, to the south, the city skyline, and to the east towards the Botanic Gardens. The northern core also created the opportunity for a distinct point of arrival. So rather than the core being buried deep within the floor plate, we were able to place it close to the perimeter, which meant that it was able to benefit from good daylight and also views upon arrival on a typical floor. And as you can see in this render, this is a render of a typical floor, so you can see the excellent daylight, the views to water, and we're also indicating in this view this could also be a potential vertical connection between multiple floors. The distinct point of arrival also worked for us, so it didn't interrupt the main workspace itself. So the main workspace remained regular, efficient and flexible, so aimed to attract a diversity of tenants. Our second key and big move was to move floor space high within the envelope. So we effectively narrowed the lower section of the building to the east between our site and 4 Daly Street to create a gap. And this firstly pushed valuable lettable area high within the envelope, and we all know that that's a great challenge with the City of Sydney competitions, that you've got to unlock the greatest potential out of the envelope. But for me, I think the biggest benefit was that it created incredible public benefit, a new laneway behind the site that connected directly into the APDG laneway network. It also opened opportunity for new retail and entertainment spaces at the lower levels, adding activation and cultural character to the precinct, as well as natural light to the lower levels of the podium, again creating that really high quality workspace. Our third big move is to set the building back on the southern edge, to create a building with a strong presence, articulation and amenity. It provided pedestrian amenity by widening the footpath for safety and activation. It also created stronger visual connections into the laneway, and I think this is particularly important is we hark back to recognise what this area once was in early settlement, a tiny warren of laneways and courtyards. So I thought really interesting to reinstate some of that. And it also announces the APDG block from the south. And then formally, it emphasises the verticality of the tower as a very elegant and memorable form without compromising the engagement with the ground plane. So these 3 key moves, the moving the core to the north, shifting floor space high within the envelope, and setting the building back to the east and south, were the key moves that unlock significant commercial and public benefit. Historically and culturally, this is a place that has significant meaning for many hundreds of years. And it's a really exciting time in Sydney, and particularly George Street. It's undergoing rapid change to become Sydney's premier street, pedestrian and light rail enabled boulevard. So for us, it was incredibly important to place the commercial lobby off George Street, to create a really clear, identifiable address that was intrinsically located with its surrounding, rather than, I think the reference scheme placed it on the corner and had options to place it off Daly Street. As you can see in this section, as people enter in off George Street, they'll experience a magnificent 3-storey lobby that's connected to the business club above. The lobby will be naturally lit and have direct views onto the laneway behind. And there's opportunities for the laneway to have artwork, as you'll see on the next slide. And then this is our render of the lobby that shows the warmth and character of the space. So as I mentioned, creating a high quality workplace was important. And we created a really regular, efficient floor plate with an efficient structural solution. The columns were placed inboard to free up the perimeter, but they also allowed us to place voids either in the centre or on the perimeter to effectively connect multiple floors and create vertical villages. And as you can see from this render, it illustrates multiple floors connected on the perimeter and also experiencing great natural light and views. So one of the most exciting parts of the scheme for me was the shared terraces. We had 3 over our building, and you can see just 2 here, 1 on level 2 and 1 on 11. And we really wanted it to blend inspiration from the best offices, luxury hotels and business clubs to provide environments that open out onto George Street. And these could be used for individual work, conferences, socialising, meeting, and of course entertaining. And they could also be shared spaces, so tenants don't have to fit them out as part of their fit out. The facade language extends the historic grain of the city and has a slender tower above that we feel reflects the aspiration and elegance of a contemporary city. At Podium level, we were keen to create a facade that broke down the homogenous identity really usually associated with commercial buildings and create a more human scale and individuality. And then as you can see from this elevation, we really carefully considered the scale, proportion, rhythm and materiality of the facade and how it complemented the neighbouring buildings, yet had its own unique identity. And then this is the view from the east, and it comes together as a series of interlocking volumes. And then to the elevation, we feel it's distinctive, powerful, yet respectful. So this is our proposal, the next generation workplace that's authentic, comfortable, flexible, and most importantly, connected to its city. It's been a pleasure to present my proposal tonight, and just before I conclude, I would really like to thank our engineering partners, NDY, Integral, Enstruct and Surface, many of who are here tonight. We're really proud to share this with you all. Thank you.
Our next presentation this evening is by Paul Reedy, of a partner at Fitzpatrick & Partners. Paul is an accomplished innovator, always seeking outcomes that expand and maximize the given opportunity, and is a sustainability advocate and facilitator on all projects. Paul's strength is working on large urban solutions. He has led teams on multiple award-winning projects, been the winner of design excellence competitions, and recently has been responsible for a number of large commercial and hotel projects within Fitzpatrick & Partners. Prior to this, he was also the design director on the 2016 Sir Arthur G. Stevenson award-winning Novartis campus at Macquarie Park. Paul worked on the Fitzpatrick Partners team for the 210 George Street competition. Would you please welcome Paul?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you. Okay, so this is really quite an interesting site. You've got some very big neighbours in 200 George and Grosvenor across the street. So for us, the first move was, do we fight or do we complement? Spoiler alert, we complemented, or we think we did. So on an urban level, that was really the move for us. How do we go about complementing two really significant contemporary buildings? And then at the workplace level, it was really a matter of, the brief was kind of generic, office, ground floor retail. So what do we do to enliven it, to bring a building to the city that is more than just, I guess, the nature of those small parts? So before I go any further, there was a lot of work involved in all of this, and both within the studio and beyond with our collaborators. I'd like to thank and acknowledge all of those, and obviously thank Polly as well for the opportunity. So that context, 200 George really set up a lot of alignments. The stage 1 DA was really strong and clear, I think, in a lot of those. And as I said, we chose not to fight. Often these design competitions, it's a matter of which rules do you break, which rules do you keep. We, if anything, were a bit worried that we maybe behaved ourselves a bit too much. But the curved forms of the geometry on 200 George and Grosvenor Place were really big keys for us. We took that and together with the proportionality of the podium, which was pretty dictated by the stage 1 DA, and the form of it, the materiality of 200 George next door in the timber expression of that building, and really try and take that idea and play with it in a unique F&P way. And then at the same time, picking up on ideas like the fact that the tower is clean and comes to ground, but at the same time it's got a podium. So we applied that to the Daly Street elevation, and really that started to set up the two components of our scheme. So we've got a very slender, tall tower that does ground at the rear, and in front of that an insertion of a lightweight timber element which brings the building forward to George Street. You can see the curved forms of our neighbours really informed the geometry, but it was a really simple set of rectilinear forms with softened edges. And then to that last element over there, the public access, we really wanted to try and create a building that was more than just straight office. We had some strategies when it came to what the workplace was and how the workplace would work, particularly differently, I suppose, in the Podium and in the Tower. It's a relatively small site. It's a relatively small building when you get to it at the end of the day. But we wanted to try and maximize the opportunities for public access within the building. So we sought to do that both at the bottom, realizing some opportunities in the what was the car park, existing buildings on the site when they come down, offer up a hole, and how do we fill that back efficiently, and then working our way up to a rooftop bar. You have to have a rooftop bar. That's just, you got to do a rooftop bar. So for us, we ended up with quite what we consider to be a simple building, an elegant building, one that behaves itself in the street. And as I said, when we got the final renders through, we were thinking, have we behaved ourselves a bit too much? This is a competition, you have to try and win them, but it is a very significant context to sit a building next to, and something that we feel we developed a building with enough of its own personality, and at the same time, something that sits respectfully in George Street really being a street wall. Viewed from the corner, the materiality and the form of the building starts to be clear. So the tower is a concrete structure, comes all the way down to ground, as I said, on Daly Street. And then the timber component of the Podium really is the piece that brings it forward to the street. In the evening in particular, we really saw that the arrangement of those office spaces allowed the timber to really come to the fore and add an awful lot to the vibrancy of the street and really allow the office and the street to connect together. So the section starts to give you an understanding of those two elements, the form of the tower coming all the way to ground, and then that last 8-meter bay, which we saw as a series of double-story spaces coming up through the Podium. And then the other thing that the diagram starts to express, I guess, is how we utilize some of the functions. So, as I said before, the idea that the car parking, which did take up in the current building, takes up all of this space. The allowable cars we managed to fit on one floor. That freed up a volume at the base of the building, which we use as a club or a venue. Dealing space in the rear, dead space, if you like, adjacent to the existing building behind us for end-of-trip facilities. The office arrangements, which I'll go into in a minute, in the Podium and in the Tower. I think, as everybody probably will, a roof terrace. We moved the plant into the center of the building, which freed up our capacity to have our roof terrace bar, rooftop bar. So then working our way, I'll go down and then up. So from the corner, we maintained, again, we probably were behaving a bit too much with the rules. So we left the entry condition on the corner, we left the core to the rear, but we lifted it up to level 1. So you came in at ground and went straight up. That freed up space along Daly Street, to go down and create space below ground, which we then utilized as a restaurant and a bar. We also squeezed in the loading dock to the rear, coming off the shared way with 200 George next door, and then down to a floor of car park that sits between this floor and the bottom floor, which we use as a venue. The basement is gone, so this is basement number 2. It happens to be on basement 2, which is kind of good. Then back to ground. The rest of the ground floor really is retail space in whatever configuration. End-of-trip facilities in the rear, as I said. The lift core is a pretty interesting configuration in itself. So you come up to level 1, pair of escalators into a really a simple enough volume that describes the two structural solutions, the timber to the front and the concrete to the rear, has a commanding position over the street on George Street, and offers something, I guess, of a commanding position to the lobby. Then you come up to the Podium, you start to see how the lifts, which we placed to the east, the lift core opens directly onto the floor plate. The lifts are back to back. I'll explain how that works in a sec. And the volume really is dominated by this veranda space or winter garden that runs the full length of the George Street elevation, describing the office space here as a series of 2-story villages with about 2,000 square meters, which, given the site is a little over 1,100, I think, from memory, was a pretty good outcome. The other advantage, I guess, of placing the core where we have is all of the amenities. We all go to the bathroom. They're all on the window. When you use the staircases as interconnection, they've all got a window as well. So all aspects of the floor plate, not just the office space, get access to natural light and views. Then on top of that, the roof terrace, and again, probably similar to others, the strategy here being as a shared space for access to outside. The plant room, as I said, we placed above that space, which allows this bank of lifts, the low-rise bank, to drop off. And then when you come to the next floor, the high-rise bank, you get quite a thin element of core with light coming through from the rear, and then access to glass the whole way around. The center of that floor plate in the tower, it's about a 630 square meter floor plate, so it's pretty small. We provided a soft zone in timber in the middle of the concrete structure, allowing for interconnection and for that to be handled in a much more efficient fashion. And then, as I said, you have to have a rooftop bar, so the only thing that we put up here was cooling towers, in effect, and then that gave us the opportunity to have somewhere to go on a Friday night. Architecturally, what that splits down into then is two components. So from a fenestration point of view, we've got a podium element in terracotta and timber being the real hero, and above that a tower element in a white terracotta and a lot of glass. The brief called for the tower to not read as a glazed volume, and from the street it doesn't, but obviously from within the office plate it does. So to the podium then, one of the things we realized when we ran a sun study was the podium doesn't receive an awful lot of sunlight, direct sunlight. We took a bit of a risk therefore and said, well, therefore we can have large clear glass facade. And when I say large, the facade panels work out at about 2 stories high, so about 8 meters in height, the better part of, and the structural grid on the timber is 4 meters. So you get these really large, expansive views out to the street, and really the office becomes part of the street, and the character of those two spaces come together. The heritage buildings opposite, the brick and sandstone, gave rise to the fenestration in the facade in the spandrel zone in terracotta. And then jumping up to the tower, we went away from the standard kind of 1,500 module of facade and sought to go for about a 4 meter wide by half height on a floor glass panel, stack 2 of those on top of each other, so you get a very broad, expansive horizontal view, which again, given it was only a 600 square meter plate, really connected the interior and exterior spaces quite well. The sun shading on the outside then gives the building, the volume, its form. He was important, he's probably less so now, but at the time of the competition, that was a culturally relevant thing to do. And so that's us, a contextual building that really brought to the fore timber as a material, both in the podium and in the tower, an elegant and simple solution in our view. Thanks very much.
Our next presentation is from Neil Durback at Durback Block Jaggers. Neil is a partner of Durback Block Jaggers and with a permanent team of 13 architects. They have won both the AIA Robin Boyd Award as well as the Wilkinson Award 3 times. While they have won numerous awards, including the Named Education Award, the Named Commercial Award, the City Lord Mayor's Prize, and a Special Jury Award, they have won only one design excellence competition. Neil is here again to present another lost competition to build the city that he is so deeply in love with. Would you please welcome Neil?
Jeff said, could I just talk about a couple of ideas? And because we really are literal, there are just 2 ideas that we're really going to talk about. But it did make me think, what is the relationship between ideas and buildings? And it's obviously a very complicated relationship. In the beginning, an idea can propel a project. But like this, at some point, these ideas get jettisoned. So an idea about a building is an idea, and it's not a building. A building about an idea is a building. It's not an idea. Okay, for us, the first thing was the problem of the setback. And traditionally, we sort of try and merge everything together. I think that's kind of the way the office rolls for some reason. But in this one, we did think, what would it be like to exaggerate the condition of the base and the top? In other words, how do you exaggerate the city wall and make that really distinctive. And then you have another building on top of it that's quite different and acknowledges the idea of a skyline building. So you can see here the real issue then is once you've separated those things is how do you join them? And that's how we've done it. So you've got the CBA, Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So that you can see quite distinctively that there are these three types, and I'll go into that in a little more detail. I mean, I think for us, the real problem in Sydney is that it's become kind of like any other generic skyline. And this competition was a way of thinking about the ideas that surround that. And in our building, we thought it would be quite a beautiful idea to start to reference quite directly those incredible Sydney buildings. So you can sort of see all the parts that have been embedded into our model and that they kind of acknowledge all those beautiful buildings that have contributed to Sydney, and so that the building itself is almost like a capture of those ideas instead of just being an individual, like a rootless individual. And I mean, I think in some ways you've seen the buildings that all this heroic sort of individualism leads to buildings that are in the end kind of more or less the same. And so we did think, what was it like to be a good neighbor that kind of was appreciative and considerate and kind of courteous. This is the next idea, is the risks and rewards of new materials, which every competition that we undertake sort of leads us down some weird sort of path. And in a funny way, this was kind of the weirdest one that we went to. But you can see that the top, we loved the idea of a glass building that just appears incredibly solid. So the top building is just this sort of plate glass image of sky. Then there's the sort of connecting pieces that are tiled. And then there's the base, so that's the sky. That's the side which you can start to see the sort of base crawling up. And we did think, what would it be like if you took sandstone, like those incredible buildings up the road or just around the corner, and started to transform that into glass? And so what we did was we actually worked with an artist in Canberra to make these big pieces of glass that were actually modeled exactly on pieces of stone. And you can sort of see here how they were. And then eventually they would be stacked together. And that's kind of how the facade would start to look of the base. And believe it or not, it was a really simple system. The glass could be sourced, funnily enough, in America. And then there were these sort of various panels that could be locked together to make up this glass stone base. You can sort of see there. And the final thing is, I mean, I think that's something in the office that we really struggle with, is that these competitions are kind of a sort of masochistic sort of endeavor. And at some point they do lead to sort of this architectural suicide where you sort of white-anting your own profession by this incredible sort of amount of work that you're supposed to deliver for these. And we thought for this one, what would it be like if we could just deliver a project that was really about hand-drawing perspectives? In other words, we forgot about all those people in Paris and London and wherever, and said, can we just do it on our iPad, these presentations? So this is kind of the drawings that we actually presented for the competition, which tries to show as clearly as possible the idea of the building, because there's a huge leap between what's supported at the beginning of a project and what actually gets built. But if the idea is strong enough, then that will just stay intact. This is some pictures of the model. We do have some plans, but I'm not going to show you any, but this is the sort of the base. This is the lobby, which we like, the sort of this incredibly squirmy sort of atmosphere. And then just some more images of the building. And then we loved the idea of this balcony where people could go and sort of have these metaphysical conversations. And that's it.
The next presentation tonight is from Grimshaw. Andrew Cortese joined Grimshaw as partner in 2009 and established Grimshaw's Sydney studio in 2010. He leads the conceptual design and strategy across all projects and sectors and is jointly responsible for leading Grimshaw's Australasian operations. After 2 decades in practice, his work is principally focused on urban planning at scales from precincts to cities and the design of complex state-significant projects with respect to infrastructure, tall buildings, learning, cultural and sports facilities, housing, and the industrial design of urban componentry. Andrew's work and research explores the transformative potential of architecture and planning at all scales through the frame of human ecology, the functional relationship of human experience to spatial and built environments, and the initiation of social, cultural, and natural agendas within organizations and economies. The result is precise, beautiful, and distinctive architecture that acknowledges communities, cultures, and the memories within. Would you please welcome Andrew Cortese?
I have to rewrite that quite verbose. So I'm not sure anyone knows that I as a student, I was taught by Neil, and he infected my mind terribly. And when I was graduating, he said that make sure however you design, that you don't design like my refuse. So and then the last time we did a talk together, he said to me that I made absolutely no sense. So. So I'm going to try and have quite a simplistic conversation tonight about this building, and I'm absolutely know that many of the ideas are commonly explored, and it shows kind of how similar most architects kind of think, but at the same time it can evolve quite different outcomes. So we talk about transformation. This is a little building. We're trying to remember how small it is. I think it's only 17,500 in LA, and it's situated within the ADG precinct, but it's amongst a lot of other major commercial and place developments that are going on in the city at the moment. And this building faced west. It's 28 stories, very small floor plates, no views or just little snippets of views. At a junction. It's part of a great precinct, but in terms of its attributes, you're sort of saying, I think Mirvac sold it to Poly, and then, of course, it wasn't seen as strategic to them. And you say, well, how do we kind of make this really meaningful to the client? How do we make it meaningful to the city? How do we make it profitable? Because it's a really challenging building for a commercial development. And of course, the AGG precinct has got these heroic buildings from all the notary architects. And the thing about it is that when you're making the opportunity to make a new precinct, all of these buildings come down as kind of individual buildings which then kind of try to assemble a place-making agenda. And I find that quite insincere and quite devoid of any intent for what Sydney is. And obviously, the city tries to mediate what our place is and what our city is, but it's the responsibility of owners and architects to collaborate and how you get that conversation between the past and the future. And then on the inside, you get these, despite the kind of the ambition of our competitions, we always get these kind of value-managed outcomes where you get this sterilised generic space, which are promoted on views and light and flexibility and all that sort of stuff that we all know. But at the end of it, it's kind of, that's what you're being delivered. And I consider that to be completely contrary to what people want and what people need to invest in. And from a sustainability point of view, you sort of say there's complete redundancy and wastefulness in what we do. So why don't we just design buildings that people want to be in? So this is what we were. We started off as a studio in Hickson Road, just across the road here, in this great 2-story space. We had no views because the windows were higher than view height, but they let in an enormous amount of sun. The volume was great. It was hardly air conditioned. It leaked air. It leaked with water, but the brick was there. The height was there. The volume was there. It had mezzanines, and it was just a wonderful place to be in. Then we moved to our office in 333 George Street, and we just made this great place along the edge so that you could stand in these big 4-metre windows and look into George Street. So this kind of idea of kind of buildings which create joy to be in, enabling yourself to live in a place within the city which you have a connection to was part of our themes. And then, like similar to Neil, is that you kind of go, well, can I make something as good as what's come before me? And you've got, all this sort of architectural vocabulary which we all kind of just take for granted as we kind of walk through the city. And of course, my favourite architects in terms of understanding what Sydney could be is Barnett and Liberty. And the thing about these buildings, and everyone kind of loves them because they're sandstone, but they're built for our climate. They were built to make an urban place. They define streets, they're strong, they're confident. What we get at the moment in competitions in the city and other buildings, you've got to break everything up. You've got to kind of adjust the context. You've got to start here, go there, move around, put a curve in. It's all this kind of compositional architecture, which is kind of about self-serving, its own repertoire of interest, but it doesn't regard the city, and it doesn't regard the continuity of the city and what we're trying to make. So these are the kind of themes. So between the city, the street, and what is a workplace that you want to be, that's kind of the simple, dumb way that we looked at the problem. So, key moves. Architectural strategy. This kind of making this great corner. As you arrive in Sydney off the Harbour Bridge, come down Gloucester, into George, you see Daly Street, and there's this great moment of sense of arrival. So how do you kind of give this, again, a moment which lives in the identity of Sydney's fabric? So an entry on a corner. I know you can move away from it, but that's what we did. But a compositional place. This idea of using structure to give architectural place. We love structure. We sit in this building here, this great wharf, and what makes it so rich is the structure made of material, and then you make place within it. And you say, well, why can't we do that? And just allow the layering of a facade which reveals structure, like James Barnett, and you just allow people to walk out and experience that structure. So why can't we do a building like that? The next one was the side core. We can do this in many ways, but it's just like getting the most compact core, which just allowed the space to be as contiguous and enjoyable. The city is kind of infected by this need for podiums, and everything has to be a podium to make it human scale. And you go, well, I've been to many cities where, just in New York, and you walk down two streets which are 20 metres apart, and they're 24 metres tall, and it's the most amazing human experience. So I don't know what human scale actually is, but I just know that we keep on using it as a device to actually reinforce a more scenographic intent, which is not necessarily genuine. So the idea here is that rather than express a horizontal demarcation of the city, just allow the building to kind of find its most elegant kind of expression. Acknowledge the horizontal datas, but don't make it that's the kind of the priority or the kind of the justification. And then, double height spaces that we all want to be in. You want to be in light, you want to step outside, you want to feel a material, you want to feel the scale which is different to what you are as a human. You want to have places where you can work together, and places where you can meet together, and places where you can look into all that sort of interaction and connectivity, which just gives a more richer human experience. But why can't we do that in a base building rather than have it something that we have to make? Because I'm sure that from our client's perspective, if you make something which is really wonderful to be in, people will pay, hopefully, more to be in that space than to just have one and then trying to make it. And of course, we love spaces at all different levels of the building, in the middle and the top. And of course, we always refer to the Opera House as some kind of intent. So the building comes like that. It's similar to Fitzpatrick's. We had the double height spaces because somehow Graham allowed a building which had a bigger envelope than the GFA. So he said, oh, great, this is fine. No, we don't have to build an envelope. So we started playing with these great double height spaces on the lower part of the building. Being in our building at 333 George, we got the cheapest floor. We moved in. We did our studio up, and then we made the cheapest floor the most valuable floor for Charter Hall. So they said, why don't we actually put more money into making the lower parts of our building engage with place. So that was the idea here. And then the building, the smaller footplates up the top, we just allowed them to couple together. So low-rise, the great kind of arching spaces, column-free, cantilevered spaces which look out onto the street and capture light, the western light, which you enjoy and embrace in Sydney, which works like that. So if you couple two together with a mezzanine, you get a 1700 or you can get a 700. So in terms of multiple tenancies, co-working tenancies or single tenants, it actually gives you that flexibility. And then you begin to get spaces like this, which are delivered to the tenant as a base building provision. And you can see here the great space. You walk out into the veranda in between the sandstone or GRC blades. On the upper floors, we started off with another mezzanine in timber, Setback, lightweight. But as it came to develop, we actually put the voids on the ends, on the corners, which gave that kind of view up and down the street, connecting the kind of the views, the more oblique views, and giving those relationships to sideless towers. And again, like everyone else, the mid-level terrace, Sydney's great climate, just get outside and get a place of prospect. So, but also a place to engage back into the scale of the building. And of course, the ground plane is continuity into the ADP, but making a really interesting retail and public realm. Again, it's small footprint. You can't do too much, so just make it as kind of an intense experience as you walk past it, knowing that you're part of an ensemble. So how do we kind of give you a sense of that continuity? And so this is the idea, was these arching cantilevered, which of course we had to increase the footpath, so the structural, very simple structure had to go back, so use that as a cantilever, which then captures these balconies with the sandstone blades as an element, and then we have the simple glass tower with the curved corners, and then we do a beautiful precast concrete core to the rear. And then you start to enable this vocabulary. It's all precast, it's all in situ, it's built the same kind of economies that any other building is built to. I'll go through this quickly. And front on, you can see the retail moving through, looking up into the buildings, and this is this kind of relationship between 200 George, the Grosvenor. So you can see it's something which is kind of talking through different histories and different times, but the nuances are there, and the visual kind of interest is provoked. And of course, again, understanding how Sydney's contrasting light falls on materials and makes it a great interest for us. So we've explored the building with these beautiful models. Again, a facade made from space and structure and the layering of its experience. And obviously, going back to all those cues, if someone's done something really well, why don't you kind of look at it and see how you can evolve it. And those fan stools by Alto, we always sort of love that cantilevering arch. So that was the idea of how to take a cantilevering structure out and looking forward like this. And that's looking straight back in at that experience of the workplace. The building in its entity on front, which is the transparent but with layering facade. And then this idea that it captures the different materiality, the solidity, the acid washing, the transparency, and the curves begin to kind of have that association with Utzum, with Seidler, with some of the 20th century where the movement of form and light and atmosphere begin to kind of give a sensibility of what Sydney architecture is. Thank you.
Our final presentation for this evening is from Simon Parsons of PTW and Michael Powell of SOM. Simon joined PTW Architects in 1996 and became practice leader in 2015. Simon brings his architectural acumen to a client-focused oversight of all practice sectors to ensure quality and architectural excellence in all projects. Simon has extensive experience in the architectural design, development, resolution, and delivery of large-scale, significant, and sensitive projects and competitions. He also contributes to professional government and industry forums across Australasia and is a member of the UDIA New South Wales. Michael Powell has worked for SOM for over a decade as an urban designer in the firm's city design practice. The primary focus of Michael's work is complex urban design master plans that guide the implementation of mixed-use and transit-oriented development, urban renewal, waterfront, and corporate and academic campus projects. Michael is passionate about solving complex problems that holistically address the site and program within the parameters of economics, culture, climate, nature, and urban design excellence. Would you please welcome Simon and Michael?
Look, it's good to be here, and there's a fair degree of sort of sadness looking at the great schemes, the great work that's been done. It's one of the costs of the design excellence process, I suppose, and ultimately you have to trust that it leads to a better city. But it is, you know, this is to some degree awake, looking at what's happened. Anyhow, so we'll get into it.
Sorry.
Oh, wrong way. So, Michael obviously represents SOM, I represent PTW. We work together on this competition. There was a huge team behind us. Neil's point about the masochism of this exercise, I completely agree with. It is such an effort to put these things together, and it's not just the key people in the project, it's the whole culture of people around the project, the families of the people working on it. They're extraordinarily difficult. Now, the issue with this site is it's in an area which is going through just a great convulsion at the moment. There is so much happening. The question that's been raised almost by every competitor about what is the role of this site, I think is very significant. You've got Grosvenor Place, one of the most muscular buildings in the city across the road. You have 200 George directly to the north. You've got the future Lend-Lease project. You've got what was the Wanda project, now the Yoo-Hoo project. To the further north, you've got the prospective Mirvac project to the east. It's just going through this incredible transformation. And we were trying with our project to firstly understand the role that our project played, and secondly to complement the group of buildings around the site. To some degree they are disjointed. There is no particular pattern to street wall or urban structure. And so we thought, well, our site is significant. It is a major element in the entry process to the city. It is in great company. It has a great frontage to George Street. And if you think about what defines the importance, how do you identify the importance of a site? The frontage of our site is equal to many of the more substantial buildings either side of our site. From the point of view of a pedestrian, the cone of view when you're walking along George Street, this site would have as much scale and as much presence as buildings of much greater volume either side of the site. So we thought it deserved to be significant. It deserved to be energetic. It deserved to have its own identity in this very, very grand company. Obviously, there's a lot going on in terms of the transformation of the public domain in Sydney as well. I can't recall a time of more sort of change. Again, our site is a significant moment along the George Street spine of the city. And again, that contributes to our view of the role it plays in the structure of the city.
So the way we approach pretty much all of the work that we do, whether it's urban design, master planning, or architecture, is to establish a series of guiding principles. And these are all very self-explanatory. I won't go into a lot of detail, but these principles are our goalposts that guide the team through all stages, and particularly when we're working between international and local teams, we want everyone on the same page working together towards a common goal. So celebrating Sydney's public realm, very important, particularly with this site's location on George Street and at a difficult corner to a very minor, almost laneway-like space. Connected both to the city, within the building, vertically, horizontally, in all aspects. A smarter workplace, facilitating the kinds of spaces that we're in tonight with interaction, social space, workspace across multiple floors in a social and professional environment. next generation building performance. We won't go into a lot of detail on this tonight, but the way the building is designed, particularly with its high performance glazing system, structural engineering system, MEP systems, the ability to reduce the building's impact on its environment and also create a more healthy and well environment for human habitation. And iconic, SOM and Poly have a long standing relationship working with each other, particularly in China. We've become accustomed to creating buildings that really stand out and celebrate what Poly is about, but also reflect SOM's unique approach to the synthesis of structural engineering and architecture. We've been burned in Sydney with these competitions in terms of colouring outside of the lines. So we started very carefully, as many teams did, with the prescribed envelope and started to understand where we could push and pull, but being mindful of not going too far beyond. The street wall, the canopy from 200 George to the south, these are things we're obviously maintaining, particularly to create a very strong relationship to the street. Our scheme pulls away from Daly Street corner. It sets back in order to think about Daly Street and its future transformation. It's a pretty challenging street, doesn't have a lot of presence, doesn't have a lot of life. We felt that pulling away, creating setback would create an opportunity for both building entry, but also longer term, creating a catalyst for longer term transformation with future development further east. So primary address is still George Street, but a second entry is provided by that setback with a staircase up to a ground floor lobby. But the main building lobby is elevated. It's raised up to provide overlook onto a occupiable balcony that looks over George Street and is shared with commercial space. And you may be asking, what's the ground floor all about? So in our scheme, we maintained a primarily commercial ground floor, activating George Street, providing continuity of active interface to that important transit corridor. Bringing nature into the site, continuation of the streetscape, creation of opportunities for art, vertical surfaces covered not just by landscape but also by water features. All of these things kind of create a more memorable entry and address and add value to the scheme in our belief. Like many schemes, we have a public terrace, but in fact, our public terrace is kind of unique. It created an opportunity for an art program, which I'll explain a little further, a little bit later, which is very much in line with Poly's national or international goal for repatriating art to China. So we would use that space as an exhibition space of their very substantial art collection. Views from the site, of course, we've all seen view analysis, but what we felt was important was to understand that these views are not panoramic. They're framed, they're targeted, they're focused to very specific locations. So the way in which the building responds, in our view, was to maximize those western and northern and southern views by positioning the core to the east. We provide inter-floor atria, creating more connectivity to create more flexibility between single-tenanted, multi-tenanted floors. The core on the east, absorbs that solar gain that you may get, particularly in the late mornings, but also, as I said, maximizes the space for views and also minimizes travel distances from the core to the perimeter rather than having a long travel distance if the core was at the north. We went kind of hard at the structural solution for this scheme. We took a lot of effort to look at both the efficiency system of the facade that would allow for transfer of loads from upper floors down through the podium levels to ground, but also to create sort of a more synergistic relationship between the architecture and the expression of the facade and that structural system. Of course, there's a lot of wizardry in terms of how the structure relates to the subway tunnels below, but we won't go into all of that. So the sort of faceted facade is the key idea of this building in terms of its external appearance. The ability to utilize the facets to create reflection, to create presence on the street, and particularly with that setback from Daly Street, the building has more presence, more visibility. And of course, the structural system is expressed very clearly. That structural system, there's many ways in which we can integrate high performance design, but in this case, we were testing the idea of natural ventilation, which we know is not typical in Sydney for commercial office buildings. However, we were exploring that as an option. So a rendering, pretty self-evident in terms of its goals: to stand out, to do more with not much program or scale and height, and work very hard in terms of creating a presence on George Street with a very distinctive architectural and engineering solution. Programmatically, I'll just keep going. Would you like to?
Okay. It's an office building. We've got the core running up the east. I think probably the points to note in this diagram are the column-free space in the top levels. There's the structural transfer, which takes the load through to the facade line and also back to a line set well back from the facade. So again, you have the same character of space from the top into the lower levels. The load then carries down, and again, a transfer from both the facade back and this inner line to link up with the facade line. This gives you a sort of compatible expression with the quite strong identity of the Grosvenor Place columns, the 200 George Street columns. There is something of a consistency in the way this building meets the ground relative to its context. I think the points have been made about the arrangement. This is the ground level. We have the retail activation. We have the corner access. We have the attempt to activate Daly Street. And Michael's point, Daly Street is a fairly desolate street. It should be much better. We thought this building had a role to play in trying to contribute to that. So we thought the potential to activate the corner was quite significant. The stairs and escalators up to an upper lobby, this great room. The arrangement of the core is obviously close to the original planned core, and that's for good reason. The presentation of the building to the corner, the potential for works of art to be incorporated with that corner presence. Most importantly, the charisma of the building in its context. And Michael sort of touched on the expression of the facade. It is obviously quite an unusual expression, but it is a significant part of the George Street experience, as I said, and it warranted it. The typical floor plates, the potential for interconnection, much of which has been addressed by previous presenters, and the character of the key public spaces.
So this is the space that I was referring to where Poly could house its travelling exhibition of ancient Chinese art. Particularly, Poly has a great investment in, I believe it's bronze statues. Some of those were actually stolen by British and French collectors from the Summer Palace, and so Poly's trying to repatriate those pieces by purchasing them at auction, sending them back to China, but we felt that this space on the terrace level would become an opportunity to exhibit much of that, or some of that, some of their collection. So it's not a traditional cafe, a restaurant, it's really a cultural destination, which is very much in line with Poly's values, core values. Our approach to the synthesis of the structure and the architecture was pretty clear when it came to the internal spaces of the building. Those diagonal braces of the structure being quite visible from within the building, and this is maybe seems counterintuitive because they could block views, they kind of maybe screening light, which you want deeper into the floor plate. But what we found through our work elsewhere is that these structural members actually add value to the rental space, and in some buildings, whether it's residential like John Hancock in Chicago, add about 25% to the value of those apartments just by the apartment having visibility of the structure. So it's become an opportunity to add value to the building, whether it's commercial or other program. Rooftop, yeah, another outdoor terrace with great views. Screened and shielded from wind with a tall parapet. Materiality was kind of an important part of course, the design. Really, it's quite a simple concept, more warm, earthy materials at the podium level, and then more engineered materials on the upper floors. Some use of local sandstone, particularly in the lobby space at ground level. So I think this is our final slide. So this is our scheme. Tries to stand out, create presence, create identity for this important area of Sydney. tries to work with as much as it can in terms of creating something that would stand the test of time and provide a legacy for Poly Group. Thank you.
Thank you.